Welcome to Rothline Live. My name is Larry Roth, and I will be your host for the evening. Basically, what I do is I have been providing 15-minute updates on using YouTube Live on Thursday nights, 8 p.m. Central Time, just to give people an idea as to what we have been working on the Rothline channel. So to get started, I have been working on a video series about the Mistress of the Hex House, which is based on a true story. I have 4 episodes that have been completed. My goal is to have about 10 episodes when it is completed. I am currently in the process of working on episode 5, which I do have a title for now. It's going to be called Cold and Hungry in the Hex House of Tulsa. And essentially, what that is about is that video episode will address the last 5 years that these two ladies were held prisoner in the Hex House and were forced to be slaves and servants for Miss Carol Ann Smith. So I have been doing some research on that. I have an outline completed. Episode 6, I've also started working on that. That one is going to be about the trial that took place. And it's going to be called 3 Charges Planned Against the Mistress. And when I get to episode 7, that episode is going to take place after, it's going to be about after Carol Ann Smith has gone to prison. And right now I have it loosely titled as Actor Shrine Years. And that episode is going to be about the time period between 1945 and 1980, during the time that the Actor Shrine owned the property, although they did not own the property for that entire time. But that episode 7 will mostly be about the Actor Shrine years of the Hex House. I'm planning on episode 8 to be the episode 8 is going to be about the Hex House. And let me reply to a message right here. How's it going? Let's see, not much here. Just updating people. All right, so yeah, thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoy this. Probably not as exciting as the stuff that you do, but hopefully you enjoy. So, episode 8. The Hex House Haunted Attraction was started in 2008, and it has been determined to be by the haunted attraction industry to be one of the scariest haunted house attractions in the nation. And it takes place in October during Halloween time. So episode 8 will be about the Hex House haunted attraction. And episodes 9 and 10, I'm hoping to have 10 episodes in the video series by the time I'm completed. 9 and 10 are still a work in progress. I'm not sure what I'm going to be addressing in those episodes. The series, which is called The Mistress of the Hex House, is inspired by a true story. And the video series that I have been working on is based upon information that is provided from newspaper articles from the Tulsa World and the Tulsa Tribune, which were published in 1944. So what I did was the Tulsa Library, the downtown Tulsa Library, has a file on the Hex House. So they have a file that contains all of these articles from the Tulsa World and the Tulsa Tribune from 1944. So that's how I'm outlining and putting my video series together based on that information. I also have a website. It's rothline.com, and I did put a link in the video description for that website. And I have been posting information that I have learned about the Hex House on that website. So if you go to rothline.com, there will be a list of, it looks like a table of contents for a book. And I have links to the different articles that I have about the Hex House if you're interested in reading about that. With the Hex House, what I have been doing, there is a lot of information available in books and online articles and videos about the Hex House, but most of them provide a brief overview of the entire story. And what I have been trying to do is to dive deeper into the story and pull out that information and provide videos about the more detailed stuff. And just to give you an update on some of what I've learned recently. Now, there'll be more information in episode 5 once I have that published. And I plan to have that published. I'm hoping to have that published on Sunday, April 3rd. But anyway, something interesting that I learned by reading these newspaper articles is that, the Hex House was a duplex. And on the other side of the duplex, there was a neighbor named Andrew Mylik. And then for whatever reason, Mrs. Smith did not like Andrew Mylik, and she wanted him to move. In fact, she tried to force him to move. She tried to talk him into moving. I don't know why she did not like this neighbor, but what she did was she talked Walida, one of her victims, into going outside, getting Mr. Mylik's attention, and then hit him with a stick. And then she fell down on the ground. They called the police and claimed that Mylik attacked Walida. And the purpose of all this was to get rid of him because Mrs. Smith did not like him. Mrs. Smith and Walida did end up pressing false charges, took the man to court, and committed perjury in court. Both Walida Horner and Virginia Evans lied with orders from Mrs. Smith to lie. They both lied about Mylik, claimed that he was a peeping Tom, that he was looking in their windows, that he was violating their privacy. None of that was true. The purpose of all that was Mrs. Smith was trying to get rid of her neighbor that she didn't like, and it did work. He ended up having to pay a large fine and having to move to a different location. And it wasn't until a few years later that it was actually that the authorities actually found out that these ladies had lied about that man. I also learned about something else that I found that was interesting is there was a man named William Patton who was an attorney in Casper, Wyoming, and he had invested some money in an oil company. So he had stock in an oil company. Now, some information I have provided is about Carol Ann Smith's husband, Fay H. Smith, who was a salesman for oil companies. And he was stationed in Casper, Wyoming for a while. Now, this is speculation on my part because I do not have a lot of information about this. I'm suspecting that Fay Smith and Carol Ann Smith knew this attorney, probably because of Fay Smith's job. So anyway, he had some stock in an oil company. And in 1938, he gave I think it was about 10,000 shares of the stock that he had. He turned that over to Mrs. Smith. Now, my question is why? Why did he do that? So far, I don't know. It's just a little interesting tidbit of information that I learned by reading these articles, that this man, and he was an attorney. Um, he was worth $1 million, which, even by today's standards is a lot, but it was certainly worth a lot back in the 1930s and 1940s. And Mrs. Smith knew him somehow, and so she was able to get money from him through stocks. So that was interesting information. I've also been taking a look at, one of the questions that a lot of people have about Carol Ann Smith and the Hex House and Willita Horner and Virginia Evans is, and the two ladies claimed that they were hexed or hypnotized or mesmerized by Mrs. Smith. And so the common question is, how did she do that? How did she take complete control of these two ladies who would follow her orders no matter what, and did harmful things to themselves and to other people? They both had good jobs, and they turned over their entire paychecks to Mrs. Smith. They also, Virginia Evans, they scammed her father out of $17,000, and all of that money went to Mrs. Smith. So the question is, why would they do that? How did Mrs. Smith have that much control or power over them? And so I got to thinking about cults. And there is such a thing. It's called destructive cults. And so I did some research on that, because destructive cults do the same thing. They take control of people and have them do things that are destructive and harmful to themselves or others. Some examples I can think of offhand is Charles Manson, Jim Jones. They're probably the most common or most infamous cult leaders. But I did learn through reading some articles, there are about 5 things that destructive cults do. One of them is deception, and that certainly fits what Mrs. Smith did to these two ladies that she victimized and held as prisoners and slaves, was deception. She lied. She lied to them. Of course, she lied to pretty much everybody. So deception was one of the things that she did. She lied to them, pulled them in. She started out acting like a kind, caring person, which was part of the deception. And she also targeted people that had recently been emotionally stressed by something. And that's something else that destructive cults do, is they target people that are vulnerable, that have had a recent stressor in their lives. And Virginia Evans, for example, the stressor that she had was she had been married for 6 months, and then she was divorced. And her family lived in Stroud, Oklahoma. She had a job and a life in Tulsa, Oklahoma. She did not want to move back home, like most young people don't want to move back home. So that was and being recently divorced, so she had those two stressors in her life. So she became vulnerable to Mrs. Smith. And Willita Horner, she also had some stressors in her life. Basically, very similar situation. She had a job, living on her own in Tulsa, and she didn't want to move back home. She wanted to be independent of the family, and So there was some stress of trying to live on her own. And so Mrs. Smith evidently targeted that and took advantage of them. And then another thing for destructive cults is isolation. They take people and they isolate them from the public. And Mrs. Smith also did that. She took the two ladies and she literally isolated them by making them live in the basement of her home. Now, the two ladies were allowed to go to their jobs, but they were expected, they went to work and they were expected to come straight back home, back down into the basement. So she isolated them from the public. And then dependence is another thing that destructive cults do. And what that means is they're dependent on the cult leader for decisions about anything. So they can't make decisions, or they're not allowed to make decisions on their own. The cult leader will make the decisions, which goes into the other item of control. For destructive cults, you're not allowed to question the cult leader or the authority. So that is another thing that Mrs. Smith did. She controlled the lives of these two women. And then the final thing is dread. A cult leader will go from being a kind, caring person, acting like they really care about your life and that they really want to help you out, to being cruel and derogatory and getting easily upset at anything that a person might do that upsets them. So there's this dread that the cult members have about the leader, that they might do something wrong and upset the leader. And for these two ladies, that is certainly something that they did encounter, is the dread of upsetting Mrs. Smith. And Mrs. Smith did have a temper. And in one of the newspaper articles, it even talks about how she got so mad at Virginia Evans at one point that she took a mirror and smashed it over her head and was yelling at her, and then smashed this mirror over her head. So she definitely used those tactics. I wanted to share that information just because I thought that was interesting, how destructive cults actually relate to the things that Mrs. Smith did to these two ladies. So I believe I have exhausted my 15 minutes for the evening. I appreciate all of you that have attended and watched, and I appreciate the comment. I will let you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you for watching, and keep an eye out for my next video. It's going to be episode 5, Cold and Hungry in the Hex House of Tulsa. Thank you, and have a good evening.